In my interview with the Director of Policy and Programs, Free Press Unlimited, and founder of A Safer World for the Truth, Leon Williams, I began by asking if it is getting more and more difficult to be a journalist in this century.
I think across the world we're seeing an increase of threats to journalists. We see more harassment of journalists. We see more online threats made to journalists, and recent research is showing that online threats eventually turn out into physical abuse, attacks, and unfortunately also after a few years of less journalist murders, we see in recent years that the number is increasing. So yes, I would say across the world there's a pattern of increased risk for journalists.
In terms of the statistics, what is this saying about the death, the killing, the kidnapping, and the abuse of journalists around the world?
Just to give you an idea about the increase in cases, Free Press Unlimited runs a reporter safety fund where journalists from around the world can ask for support. In 2018, we had about 150 requests. In 2019, we had 300 requests. In 2020, we have 700 requests. I don't think that is because Free Press Unlimited has suddenly become a world-known brand. It is basically because the amount of threats, the harassment, photographers whose camera has been taken, kidnappings, legal prosecution because of new laws that make the work of journalists impossible or that make critique impossible is on the rise. And so that's just one statistic. Last year, according to RSF, 64 journalists were killed. The year before it was 50. This year we see the enormous threat to journalists in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, in Sudan. Several journalists have been arrested for covering the current protest that is going on against the military coup. So you could say that there's a lot of incident-related, public demonstrations-related, temporary arrests, etc., that are happening, including very grave human rights violations, like in Belarus and in Afghanistan, for example. A lot of journalists have been killed this year. So yes, we are concerned with the rising numbers in many ways.
Why this initiative of the People's Tribunal?
Well, one of the most important things that we think is missing in the entire protection and prevention of crimes against journalists is prosecution. We see since 1992, 1,400 journalists have been murdered around the world. These 1,400 journalists had 1,400 media houses where they belonged to, 1,400 families, and they were working on more than 1,400 stories that were killed with them. So this is one of the grave issues that we see, because there's no prosecution of the ones that order these murders or the ones that have enacted these murders. In more than 80% of the cases, there's no prosecution. So the murder of a journalist is really a cost-free exercise on behalf of states or criminal gangs or the ones that want to silence journalists. And we think that if we don't solve the prosecution issue, if we don't get punishment for killing a journalist, we can protect as many journalists around the world, but then the numbers will increase because it's basically for free.
At the hearing that I listened in on, and in one of the testimonies, someone said that social media has become a megaphone for the tyrant. Do you agree? And would you say that it has caused more harm than good?
Well, most indications show that some of these social media platforms are doing an exceptionally bad job if it comes to preventing hate speech and threats to journalists. And recent research that was executed by the Oxford Institute shows that, for example, in the case of women journalists, online threats transform into online threats. In more than 20% of the cases, online threats result in physical violence against women journalists. So if you extrapolate that with the amount of hate speech that is happening across the world, where journalists are being blamed for everything that is wrong, and you see the important role that government actors play in cursing journalists for their work, in basically criticizing journalists for their work, in basically saying journalists are responsible for fake news, then we believe that state actors, political actors, have a hugely important role in the rising number of threats that are made to journalists, which eventually transform into physical harm. So yes, we think social media are a megaphone, and we see also that social media companies are not taking any responsibility for it. So that is a serious problem. And at the moment, I would agree, certainly in the case of harm to journalists, that social media platforms play a bad role, more bad than worse.
I'd like to thank you so much, Leon Williams, Director of Policy Programs, Free Press Unlimited. Thank you so much for taking out time to talk on this very important issue, an end to impunity for crimes against journalists. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for asking me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Up next is a report by the Nigerian Bar Association calling for the immediate treatment of persons with gunshot wounds, as stated in the Gunshot Injury Act 2017. Concerned by the slow implementation of the Compulsory Treatment and Care for Victims of Gunshot Injury Act, which was signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari in 2017, the Nigerian Bar Association convened this meeting.
Put your hands together for Chief Michael Zekeme.
The NBA reveals that the act is yet to yield its full benefits to Nigerians, as there are widely reported cases of victims of gunshot injuries being denied treatment by hospitals and clinics on grounds of fear of arrest by officers of the Nigerian police force.
Do we use mere advocacy? Do we go confrontational by going to court to seek an order of mandamus compelling medical doctors to treat victims and to compel members of the Nigerian police force not to harass such medical doctors or medical personnel for treating such victims?
When citizens get shot or have gunshot injuries and are taken to the police, they are taken to the hospitals or treatment centers, that most persons lose their life due to the fact that the hospitals insist on police report.
While the police insist that victims of gunshot wounds should be given proper treatment, they want all cases of gunshot injuries reported.
We have never stopped them and will never oppose them treating victims of gunshot wounds. What we've always asked is, when you commence the treatment, please reach out to us. Once you commence a treatment and you suspect that this is a gunshot wound or a gunshot injury, please reach out to us.
The NBA, as a public interest organization, has set up a 25-man team, which includes stakeholders across the security agencies and the association. The idea is that the committee will consider areas of concern by stakeholders for the purpose of drawing up a national framework for the effective implementation of the Act.